Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about insincere communication, what it is, what it does to you, and things that you can do when you find yourself in a situation where you're involved in a conversation with someone and you realize that the communication occurring is not sincere. Insincere communication is conversations where the intent is maybe a little manipulative, disingenuous, or lacking in authenticity. Tactics can go unnoticed, but leave you feeling so frustrated, confused, invalidated. What happens when you're caught in a situation is you're in the midst of a communication or conversation with someone, and you think, and your intention is to problem solve, connect, resolve an issue, seek better understanding. But then you realize that that's not what you're getting. That's not what is happening. You're feeling a little invalidated, unheard, frustrated, and you're feeling like the other person is more likely seeking to win a fight or prove their point versus come to an understanding with you. And a lot of times this happens when the person that you're in communication with seeks to maintain a level of control or a controlling dynamic in their relationship with you. And this person is not seeking to be accountable or vulnerable, and they use subtle, insincere communication styles to continue to have a level of power and control in your relationship dynamic. And it's a little bit manipulative, and it can feel in a lot of ways like constant boundary violations. And we're going to get into that. What insincere communication does to us is it undermines emotional safety and respect in relationships. One of my favorite creators and experts in the mental health space, Richard Grannon, often says, abandon all sincere communication with the terminally insincere. And in this video, we're going to talk about some ways that we may determine somebody might be terminally insincere, and it's time that we just abandon conversation. Before we get there, let's talk about some methods of insincere communication so you recognize it when it's happening, and some ways that you can respond to insincere communication to hopefully get the conversation back on track before you decide, I need to abandon all conversation because this is a terminally insincere person and I may not be able to relate to this person in a way that's productive. So now let's get started with talking about some examples of methods used in insecure communication. The first one is telling you how you feel or should feel. An example of this is saying something like, you're just being overly sensitive, or you're angry for no reason. This is a boundary violation. The reason this is a boundary violation is because it dismisses or invalidates your perspective, making the conversation about their interpretation or their views and their facts and their story versus your side of it. It prevents you from being able to express where you're coming from, makes you feel as if you are being forced to live in someone else's interpretation of events, rather than that person seeking to understand your interpretation or your perspective or what your intent was. It also derails sincere communication. It creates frustration and defensiveness. It can catch you off guard, and rather than communicating your perspective or your needs, you find yourself frustrated and becoming defensive and defending your actions or your feelings. A way that you can respond when someone is doing this to you is you can simply say, I'll decide how I feel, but right now I'd like to focus on the issue at hand. Another way that people engage in insincere conversation is by subtle insults, often masked as jokes. Ooh, this one frustrates me the most. I'm not going to lie. I can't stand it. Or it could be like backhanded compliments. So an example of this is someone you're in conversation with someone and they throw in like a little insult like, wow, you're really smart for someone who didn't go to college. It must be nice to have so much free time on your hands to think about all this stuff you think about. This is a boundary violation because it erodes trust and respect while also allowing the person in this conversation to maintain some sense of plausible deniability. This disrupts sincere communication by introducing hostility disguised as humor or just my personality and my take on things. It's really not fair to you to endure this type of hostility when you're attempting to be vulnerable and sincere with someone in conversation. Sometimes what I'll do is when I feel an insult that's disguised as a joke is I'll just say, ouch. I do that for myself so that I can remember, like, that was an insult, like, that hurt. And also subtly lets the other person know, like, what you just said affected me. I'll start with maybe like an ouch, just to see if the other person responds and corrects themselves or realizes what they did or how they spoke to me and corrects the behavior on their own. And if they do, I might let that pass. But if it continues to happen, I may be more direct and say something like, that sounded more like an insult rather than a joke. Can we be a little bit more respectful when we talk to each other, please? Of insincere communication is passive aggressiveness. The impact of this is it avoids direct communication and it leaves you feel guilty. It leaves you feeling guilty or confused. Something you can say when someone is doing something like this is saying something like, if something's bothering you, I'd rather you just talk to me about it directly. Another example is deflection or changing the subject. If someone says something like, well, you're not perfect either. Why are we even talking about this? It doesn't even matter. This allows for that insincere person to derail or avoid the conversation or the communication altogether. Sometimes you might have to just pull them back in and say, this is important to me, and I do believe it needs to be resolved before we move on to anything else or another topic or another subject. The reason why people may use insincere communication styles is because they are avoiding responsibility, they are avoiding accountability, and they are avoiding being vulnerable and their own vulnerability. This person may be very insecure. They're afraid of being wrong, rejected, or exposed. So they use these tactics to protect themselves. Or this person might be immature. They lack the emotional skills to engage in honest conversations. This is the case. Communicating with a person like this may take a lot of patience and redirecting and modeling behaviors of mature communication. Or you could be dealing with someone who is simply conflict avoidant. They prioritize short-term comfort or maintaining control over addressing and resolving deeper issues. Another reason why people may engage in communication this way is because they see everything as winning versus resolving and connecting. Every time you engage with them, they're putting on their armor and they're getting ready for a fight. And their goal is to win. They want to feel like they want to feel better after leaving that conversation because they told you so or they proved their point. Their goal is not to see your perspective, seek understanding. They're not curious. They don't care about how you leave that conversation. They don't care about how you feel after that conversation. None of that matters to them. All that matters to them is that they walk away from that conversation feeling like they won. So let's talk about some ways you can recognize when this is happening in the moment, in the middle of the conversation. Is pay attention to patterns. Repeated behaviors like passive aggressiveness, subtle insults, gaslighting, deflecting, blame shifting. Those things typically become patterns in someone's communication style. So you can almost start noticing these patterns and expect that to happen when you're about to engage in a difficult conversation with this person. You may find that when you're discussing things with this person and it's about them or something they want to talk about or something that doesn't involve different perspectives, that the conversation goes fine. But when the minute there is a conflict or something to resolve or a change in perspective that you want to offer, you need to express the way a behavior made you feel. These patterns of communication start to come up, and you need to deal with them right away in the moment as it's happening. Another thing you can do is notice how you feel. When you're talking with this person, do you suddenly start to feel frustrated, out of balance, validated, unheard, unseen, maybe confused or emotionally unsafe in that conversation? That might be a sign that you're in a conversation with someone who is insincere. Their communication towards you is not sincere, and that conversation is not going to be productive. Another thing you can do is spot logical gaps. If their arguments rely on distraction, blame, or dismissiveness, the intent may not be genuine. So let's just recap some ways that you can deal with handling insincere communication. You want to set clear boundaries. Assert your emotional autonomy, such as saying to someone, please don't tell me how I feel. That's something I decide for myself. Address subtle insults directly. Reflect to the core issue. Finally, disengage when necessary. It is important that you protect your confidence and your perspective. Avoid internalizing manipulative tactics like gaslighting and insults when you're speaking with someone who's insincere. I'm reading the book 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and one of the important pillars is to respect yourself and require that others respect you as well. If you notice that when you're communicating with a certain person, it is typically insincere, it may be time to respect yourself enough to disengage with that person. Because allowing for someone to continue to violate your boundaries and disrespect you ultimately impacts your self-esteem. Sometimes people do these things and they engage in this type of communication because they want to control how they want to control and continue to have power over the relationship dynamic. What I have found is oftentimes people who behave this way, they want to keep our relationship where they want to keep the dynamic of the relationship as to me always emotionally giving and supporting them. They don't want to give emotionally. They don't want to support. They don't want a reciprocal relationship. So they engage in insincere communication, type of manipulative and insincere communication styles to avoid taking responsibility and accountability and pulling their weight in the relationship. Is it forces you to remain in that person's world, in their story, in their perspective. And you don't get to have opinions, perspectives, or any opinions or perspective or a life of your own. You are a sidekick to their story. You don't have your own story. You are merely a sidekick in their life. You are not your own person, your own individual with your own life and your own needs. It is all about them. It is all about their needs, and your needs do not matter at all. and they want to keep it that way. So they will avoid responsibility, they will avoid accountability, and they will avoid vulnerability. These people are extremely insecure, and vulnerability makes them feel weak. People like this are also very selfish. They're extremely selfish, and they don't even realize how selfish they are. Interacting with them is always going to feel like you're being drained, you're giving, and there is no reciprocity. You only interact with them when they feel good or they need you to bring them up. If they call you and you're not feeling at your best and they need you to bring them up or bring them out of their mood, but they see that you're not feeling at your best, they will subtly make you feel bad for answering the phone and not being in a good mood. Rather than inquire, like, how are you feeling today? What's going on with you? They don't care. What they are doing is they're letting you know you cannot have an off day when I need you to support my emotional needs. Relationships with people like this are always going to frustrate you, and sometimes when you realize that this person is not going to change, it may be time to reevaluate how you interact with them so that you can continue to maintain some emotional safety, and it might be time for you to exercise some boundaries as far as how much access this person has to you. Recognizing that someone is insincere or their communication style is insincere, it empowers you to protect your boundaries and find healthier relationships. Addressing these behaviors takes practice and courage, but it's worth it because it leads to you having healthier and better relationships. Sometimes people can change with how they interact with you, and you can teach people how to treat you. But if they don't show that they're willing to interact with you in a healthy way and a balanced way, then they just don't deserve to have access to you. And that gives you time to protect your energy, maintain your self-esteem, and show up as your best self in your other relationships as you're building healthier, more balanced, and more reciprocal relationships. I hope this video helps. And if you've noticed any other types of things or examples that people have done in conversation or communication with you that was insincere, and other ways that you've been able to manage it and set boundaries, feel free to leave those examples and those stories in my comments in the comment section below. I love reading all the comments, and I think we have a great community here where we're supporting each other as we're navigating these very common issues as we're trying to relate with other people. I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.